What is up, YouTube, and welcome back to another live stream on high altitude investing. Today is the 16th of January 2026. Today's title for today's live stream is Why the 4-Year Cycle is Being Overwritten. So basically, we're going to be talking about how the standard crypto 4-year cycle, we're deviating from that, how that works, how that's a true principle that happens more often than people realize in markets, and how you guys can profit off of what's up ahead, because there's way more opportunity than most people realize in the crypto markets in the near future. So let's pull up Bitcoin first. We'll pull up Bitcoin on the index, and we'll talk a little bit about the 4-year cycle here. So if you guys don't know, the 4-year cycle is basically what happened for the past 2 cycles. So this is a real thing that has happened twice, the 4-year cycle. Historically, there's only 2 times that it technically happened, because previous to that, we didn't have a 4-year cycle. This first cycle ever on Bitcoin was not a standard 4-year cycle. But the previous 2 cycles were 4-year cycles. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how this works and how the market can kind of deviate from a traditional 4-year cycle. See, it looks like the stream is working. Hopefully the link is working. Cool, the link is working. Welcome everybody to today's live stream. So let's get started here, the 4-year cycle and how crypto can deviate from that. Well, first of all, if you go study these cycles, for example, if you read a good book about cycles, or if you go ask ChatGPT even, or Grok about cycles and the way the cycles work, it will tell you that traditionally, actually, it's very common for markets to break free from a cyclical pattern. So if you've had 2 or 4, 3, 2, whatever 4-year cycles in a market, or even an 8-year cycle, or whatever cycle you're looking at, it's actually very common for these markets to break out of that cyclical pattern and move into a bigger cycle. Because here's the thing, cycles in markets are fractal in nature. And what is a fractal? Well, very simply, a fractal is a pattern that repeats that same pattern on all different time frames, like a triforce, for example. If any of you guys have ever played The Legend of Zelda, you can put infinite amounts of triforces inside of each other, and it's just the same pattern on every single scale, right? That's what a fractal is. So markets are the same way. Markets are fractal in nature. You can see this Triforce fractal right here. It's the same pattern, just on different scales over and over again. So this right here would be a small version of this right here. Same pattern, if you look inside right here, this little Triforce is the same pattern as this bigger Triforce. So that's the way that these cycles work inside of markets. So you can have 2 4-year cycles like this, and then deviate into a bigger cycle where a bigger cycle takes over. And then all of a sudden, this massive pump happens in the market because a bigger fractal, a bigger cycle took over. And essentially, it's not that the 4-year cycle stops, it's that a bigger cycle has so much more power and more momentum that it can take over and completely eliminate the power that the 4-year cycle essentially has. So if we go over, a good example of this would be NVIDIA, of one of these kind of patterns inside of a market. NVIDIA Corporation. So let's pull it up right here, and let's take it off the logarithmic chart and take a look at what happened to NVIDIA here. So NVIDIA was doing a classical cycle. This isn't technically a 4-year cycle. It's a little bit bigger, but there's different markets are going to have different cycles. If you're looking at crypto, especially Bitcoin, has historically seen a 4-year cycle. for the past 2 cycles. But other markets in the world are going to be on different time scales than what crypto and Bitcoin is. So if we're looking at NVIDIA Corporation here, and we take our sine cycle tool, and we just kind of put this like somewhere like right here, maybe like right here, okay? So we have this cycle going on, right? The market's pumping, pulling back. We have this cyclical pattern here. Big pump here, big pullback here, big pump here, big pullback here. So this is clearly a cyclical pattern in the market, but it doesn't just keep doing that, right? NVIDIA doesn't continually follow this pattern. If you look, right here is where we should have pulled back down because of this 5-year, 6-year cycle right here happening on NVIDIA, right? We should have pulled back right here according to the 5-6 year cycle happening here on NVIDIA. But what happens? A bigger cycle takes over, a bigger fractal, a bigger pattern of a bigger cycle with more power and more meaning to it, more, I don't know what word to use. Yeah, power takes over. And you can see we completely deviate from that 4-year cycle, or in this case, 5 to 6 year cycle, and pump all the way to a new all-time high. So this is just one example of one market that was doing a cyclical pattern that happened twice, just like what we saw with crypto. But instead, it deviated because of a bigger fractal, a bigger pattern, a bigger cycle taking over and just completely negating any power that this 5 to 6 year cycle had on the market. So this is really important to understand because a lot of people are fully believing in the 4-year cycle that it has to happen. But if you actually research this, like go ask ChatGPT or go ask Grok or go buy a book on cycles and learn how this stuff works, you'll find that the 4-year cycle or 8-year cycles or whatever cycle you're looking at, there's oftentimes a deviation. Like it's completely common. It's not uncommon in any way whatsoever for a market that's stuck in a certain cyclical pattern to break out of it because of a bigger fractal and a bigger pattern taking place. So this is pretty important because a lot of people right now in crypto have bought into this idea that the 4-year cycle is going to keep happening, that we're just stuck inside of this pattern that's going to keep happening. So let's pull up XLM here as an example. Stellar lumens, okay. So we have stellar lumens here on the right, or we're just only looking at stellar lumens. So used to comparing charts together, sometimes I say stuff out of habit. So you can see we have stellar lumens here. Stellar lumens have this big pump right here, followed by a big correction, followed by another big pump, big correction, and a big pump. And we have pulled back a little bit right here. But now people are kind of sold on this idea that stellar lumens is in a 4-year cycle, that it's just going to crash like this because it's doing the same thing that it did right here and that it did right here. But the thing about these markets, again, most of the time it happens more often than people realize. Markets will deviate or break free from a traditional cycle. So let's pull up XLM here on the bottom. And let's pull up NVIDIA on the bottom as well. So if we look, we see XLM up on the top and NVIDIA down here on the bottom, right? So this is actually a very similar structure in these markets. If you look at this and you have an open mind to what's happening here and you're not closed off to a certain philosophy or an idea that the way that the market has to move, if you look at these two patterns, you actually see a lot of similarities. You know, here's a big pump here, big pullback, big pump, big pullback, a lot of sideways accumulation here. Here with NVIDIA, big pump, big pullback, big pump, big pullback, a lot of sideways accumulation here. Now, if you look at NVIDIA down here on the bottom, we even had a pullback right here as we started to get closer to the old peak right here. And this is a fairly big pullback on crypto, but crypto is more volatile than the stock market is. So it doesn't surprise me that the pullback that we saw as we started to approach our previous peak here was bigger than what we saw with Nvidia down here. But essentially, these markets are doing the same pattern. So for people that are sold on the idea that the 4-year cycle has to happen, that crypto is just going to do a 4-year cycle, and there's no other way to look at the market, go study cycles, because cycles are fractal in nature. And so because of the fact that cycles are fractal in nature, a bigger fractal, also known as a bigger cycle, can take over and completely eliminate, overtake, overpower, overwrite the previous cyclical pattern. Again, this happens all the time in markets. And sometimes you'll get 2 cycles, 3 cycles, but eventually it's going to deviate. The market isn't just going to go like this forever. You know, it's going to deviate from that pattern and break out into a bigger fractal of what's happening, a bigger cycle. And Nvidia and Stellar Lumens being one good example of this, but there's other examples too. So even just looking at some of these coins, they're not following a traditional 4-year cycle. Like, let's pull up Digibyte, for example, and let's pull up Digibyte on the where is it? There's a chart here that shows the whole. Here it is. Here we go. So Digibyte, for example, if we zoom into Digibyte, this is a perfect example of what I mean by cycles being fractal in nature. So if you guys don't know what a fractal is, definitely do some research this week on fractals and learn a little bit about what a fractal is. Because like I said, the Triforce is a very common example of a fractal. It's one of my favorite ones to look at because I loved The Legend of Zelda growing up. It was one of my favorite things to do is play The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time especially. I love Ocarina of Time. Joe Short, what is up? Thank you for tuning in. When do you expect BTC dominance to drop down? Soon. We'll check out that chart here in a little bit. But Bitcoin dominance is set up for a big correction according to all of my estimations. Alex W775 says, could you give short-term targets for T-Fuel? Yeah, we can talk about that in a little bit. Thomas, BTC diamond, waving hand. Bitcoin is a diamond. I love Bitcoin. It's awesome. Do you think XMR will correct slightly now and then continue to perform bullish, breaking through the $1,000 mark and continuing to rise even more? Yes, actually, 100%. I do believe XMR is starting a big bull run. And after I talk about Digibyte here, we'll talk about why XMR is starting a big bull run. There's a lot of reasons, but some really good reasons just purely from the perspective of the chart pattern alone, right? So it's a pretty good setup. So this is what a fractal is, okay? A fractal is a repeating pattern on all different time scales, right? You see this pattern over and over again, this Triforce pattern fractaled inside of itself over and over. So this is the way markets move, and I can prove this to you. This isn't just something I'm just pulling, just saying is true and just, oh, look, you guys believe me, this is the way markets work. No, this is actually how markets work. If you look at Digibyte, for example, and you grab this current, or this cycle that we're currently looking at here with Digibyte, and you measure from the bottom of the cycle over to here, so from where the cycle starts to the top and then back to the new bottom that it made, and you zoom out, this is the first cycle ever for Digibyte, right? Big pump, pullback, and then recovery up to a new all-time high. If we just take that pattern and stretch it out, that's exactly what it did the last time that it pumped. or the time that it pumped right after, right? It did the same pattern all over again. If you just stretch that pattern that I just pulled from that little cycle and put it on top, so you can see it's the same pattern in the market happening all over again on a different time scale. Okay, so we have our little market cycle here, then we have our bigger cycle right here, which is really the little market cycle all over again, but in a bigger, longer fashion, a bigger extended pattern. So this is just one example of a market extending to a bigger cycle. Again, if you guys look this up, go ask. Everybody trusts ChatGPT nowadays for some reason. But just go ask ChatGPT. ChatGPT will tell you the market cycles very commonly will extend into a bigger fractal, a bigger cycle, because cycles are fractal in nature. So this is just one example. Now look what we can do here. Let's take this cycle right here, right? Let's take that cycle right there, and let's see what happens if we copy that cycle and overlay it on top of our current cycle with Digibyte. So we're taking this fractal, okay? Zoom out, stretch this fractal over, put it up right here, get it kind of lined up nicely here. And look at that. Look how similar this cycle right here is to the bigger cycle, right? We have this big cycle right here. It's the same thing as this one right here, but it's bigger. It's clearly bigger. Nobody can argue otherwise. It's clearly the same pattern, but it's bigger. So this is why it's so important to understand the fact that these markets are fractal in nature. There is a market cycle, but it's not going to do the same pattern over and over again in the same time scale. It might do pretty much the same pattern, but it's going to change time scales. It'll be bigger, smaller, and even you can completely deviate from this just pumping and dumping type shape and move into an uptrend, where no longer is the market doing this, where it's just pumping and dumping and pumping and then dumping and then pumping and then dumping, but it can break out of that. Delete this right here. The market can break out of that pattern. Let me clean this up a little bit so you guys can see better. The market can completely break out of this pumping and dumping structure and move into a bull market. This happens all the time, especially with the new technology that's actually valuable and useful. You're going to break out of these patterns, and that's exactly what happened to NVIDIA, right? NVIDIA was just pumping and dumping, doing this 5 to 6 year cycle thing, just like what Bitcoin has been doing, just like what XLM, just like what XMR was doing, you know? Just pumping and dumping in the big picture in this big cycle. Well, look at XMR. XMR is deviating from this pattern completely. Like, look at this. So here's NVIDIA. Here's this pump, pull back, deviate from the 4 year, in this case 5 to 6 year cycle completely and start an uptrend. And look, now it's just completely deviated from that pattern. Not that there wasn't corrections, but no longer is it just oscillating like a sine wave continuously. It completely deviated from that pattern. And this is indeed what happens to markets that get mass adopted by the public. If a market is going to be mass adopted by the public, it's going to deviate from its accumulation cycle. It's going to deviate from that and start an uptrend because demand drives price. And if you have enough demand and that demand continually grows and there's adoption, then you get something like this. What happened to NVIDIA or Apple? Apple did the same thing. But before we look at Apple, check this out. So let's keep NVIDIA up here on the top. And let's pull XMR up on the bottom down here. Let's pull up XMR on Bitfinex just for the sake of visuals, right? XMR is literally doing, this is why XMR is one of the best buys, and it is such a good buy right now. It's doing exactly what Nvidia did. This is what I've been preaching to you guys for years, that crypto is breaking free from our traditional cycle, and it will be mass adopted by the public, and it will start these big uptrends that nobody's expecting because everybody married the 4-year cycle as the end-all be-all of technical analysis in the crypto markets. But look at XMR. XMR is completely breaking free from this accumulation structure just like Nvidia did right here, and breaking out into a massive bull market. XMR is one of the best buys that you could buy right now in the market, even with it being pumped right here in the short term. Because look what happened to Nvidia is it broke free from that traditional 5 to 6 year cycle in the case of Nvidia, right? XMR breaking free out of this 4-year cycle structure in the case of XMR. So Nvidia started this massive uptrend. XMR is doing the same thing right now. It's breaking from this pump and dump pattern into a bigger fractal, a bigger cycle. And that's why we're going to see all of these 4-year cycles overwritten. That's why we see so much evidence, contrary to popular belief, that the 4-year cycle is no longer true. You know? But even let's, back to talking about Apple and new technologies breaking free of accumulation structures. This is what happens to technologies when they're adopted by the public. Let's pull up Apple computers, okay? Apple was pretty much going sideways. It had its own little cycle going on here. Pump, pull back, pump, pull back. But it broke free from that pattern. And this is what happened when adoption started happening for Apple. You see this huge deviation from this cycle that it was in, from this essentially just going like this, and it starts an uptrend and starts a big bull market. So this is what I've been trying to tell you guys with crypto for a while now, is that we're breaking free from what people think is going to happen. And we're breaking out into what new technologies do if they have a lot of real world value and a lot of use case. And that's into a true adoption cycle where demand doesn't stop growing. And because of that, the price gets driven to astronomically high levels. That's what crypto is doing. That's what we're set up to do. There's so much evidence for this, way more evidence for this than the idea that we're going to play out a 4-year cycle. I know that's completely contrary to what people believe is the right and true way to look at these markets, because right now, 4-year cycles are cool. If you want to be cool, talk about the 4-year cycle. People are going to like you. They're going to think that you're really wise and intelligent, and that, oh, look, it did this a couple times. It's just going to do it forever. No, do some research on cycles. It's extremely common for cycles to break out of a traditional 4-year or 8-year or whatever cycle it's in into a bigger fractal, a bigger market cycle that takes over and has more power and more force than the traditional cycle that it was previously bound into. And if you look at Bitcoin currently, I'm telling you, Bitcoin is shockingly similar to early day Apple computers. It's already showing signs of deviating from this pump and dump pattern into a truly powerful big picture uptrend. Just eyeballing these charts together, you can see a lot of similarities between early day Apple right here and Bitcoin present day. It's shockingly similar. These two charts are right down to the volume. Here's 2008 on Apple. Here's the FTX crash. Here is the internet bubble. Here's the 2017 bubble for crypto. I mean, these charts are way more similar than people would care to admit. Increasing volume and price, increasing volume and price. And then you start to drop off on volume here with Apple computers. But the only reason that you start to drop off on volume here is because all of the institutional volume is already in. That's what all of this is. This is all institutional volume for Apple. So once the institutions position themselves, of course, volume is going to decline and price is going to keep rising because retail just keeps buying and FOMO buying and FOMO buying and FOMO buying, but institutions are gone, which is why there's virtually no volume on Apple now. But look how much it grew on almost no volume. It grew that much because the big institutions positioned themselves from 1997 until 2009. That's what all of this volume right here is. And now it's just retail traders, and that's why you can see it's dropped off a cliff in terms of trading volume. But that's what happened to Apple early on in its cycle. It was heavily accumulated by big institutions. That's exactly what Bitcoin is doing right now. Believe it or not, I know if you go read the news and you're going to find evidence contrary to this, but this is true. This is what's actually happened. This is what the data is showing us on the chart. This is what the truth is that Bitcoin is set up for a big rally, a big bull market, just like what happened to early day Apple computers. Big accumulation. Perfect setup. So this is what Bitcoin is doing. This is what the crypto markets are doing. They're breaking out of the traditional 4-year cycle that now everybody believes is going to happen forever. And they're breaking out into a bigger institutional adoption and adoption by the public that will continue to grow in the same way that new technologies always do when they're adopted by the public. That is what's happening with crypto. XRP, let's pull up XRP. XRP, maybe Coinbase has enough data, I don't know. Let's see if it does. Let's pull up XRP on Bitstamp. We'll probably have enough data for us. Same thing for XRP, okay? Traditional cycle, pump, pull back, pump, pull back. Now we've started to pump again, but what most people think is going to happen is that this is just going to go like this forever. People have this idea that the 4-year cycle is some weird thing that just continues forever because it happened twice. But if you go study cycles, again, I've said this multiple times in today's stream, but it's true and you need to understand this. If you go study cycles, cycles are fractal in nature, just like this Triforce right here. How I can draw triangles inside of triangles and it makes the same pattern over and over again, just on different scales, different size of the same pattern over and over again. That's the way market cycles work. Same pattern, different scales. So you can have 2 4-year cycles and then break out into a way bigger cycle, a bigger in the case of this pyramid, this Triforce example, a bigger triangle, if you're thinking of the market cycle as a pattern, into a bigger cycle, a bigger fractal that has more power and it completely overrides the previous cycle. Not that the 4-year cycle isn't something that happened, not that it wasn't in the chart, but that a bigger cycle takes over and completely eliminates the previous cycle. And if you look again, let's pull up XRP on the top here, and let's pull up, for example, NVIDIA again here on the bottom. If you look at these two charts, This is what an early day accumulation looks like. Here's NVIDIA on the bottom. Here's XRP up here on the top. See, you can see it in the chart. One big pump in the market, one big pullback. Another big pump, another big pullback. Sideways accumulation for quite some time. And then boom, we break out into what is looking like a bigger, extended institutional cycle. If you look at NVIDIA on the bottom, big pump, big pullback, big pump, big pullback. And I know that this one, in the case of this one, the first one on XRP is bigger and the second one on XRP is smaller. And NVIDIA, the first one is smaller and the second one is bigger. But essentially, it's the same market structure in these markets. The same thing happened. As we like to say, history, I won't even type it out. Who cares? I'll just say it. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Okay? So yeah, you're going to get the same type of thing happening in these markets pretty close. It's going to rhyme with other stuff that's historically happened. And if you look right here, NVIDIA on the bottom, XRP up on the top, same accumulation, breaking free out of that structure into an institutional mass adoption public phase where this technology is now adopted and used by everyday people in a significant way, which drives price to levels people just can't even imagine, essentially. That's what's coming for crypto. Crypto is breaking free from the little triangles, if you want to use the fractal pattern example. It's breaking free from the little triangles, the little four-year cycles, into a bigger triangle, an institutional cycle, a bigger market cycle that has more meaning and more power to it. This is the way markets work. Again, go study this stuff. Go look it up. Go Google it. Go chat GPT it. Whatever you want to do. It will tell you that it's very common for markets to break out of a traditional cycle into a bigger fractal, a bigger cycle. It'll tell you that. Okay, you guys get the point. Let's talk about some of the coins you guys want me to cover. Let's pull up Bitcoin dominance here. Bitcoin dominance. Even Bitcoin dominance is in a wider cycle than 4 years. It's not even 4 years. It's wider than 4 years. And if you look at the Bitcoin cycle, the Bitcoin dominance cycle, Bitcoin dominance is ready to do what it did in the last two major bull markets, which is curl over like it did right here and curl over like it did right here for a big drop in Bitcoin dominance, which really just means everything is going to go up, including Bitcoin, because Bitcoin always rallies during these periods where Bitcoin dominance is falling off a cliff. So this is the type of structure that we see in Bitcoin dominance. This is a head and shoulders. We have a left shoulder here, a head right here, and we're making the right shoulder as we speak. So we should get a breakdown here within the next couple of weeks or so, which is going to send all of the altcoins soaring. XMR, it's going to go crazy. XRP should start breaking out again. AVAX is going to officially double bottom from its cycle. We have so many coins that are primed for big picture bull markets. And when, you have to understand, when I say big picture bull market, I mean we're going to start it, which means the short term is bullish too. I'm not just using that as a cop-out for, if I'm wrong, I said only big picture. No. The market is going to start pumping. We already see it with XMR. We're going to see the pump begin with coins like AVAX, with coins like Litecoin, with coins like XLM again, with coins like XRP. We're going to see the breakout on these coins. Coins like Dogecoin. We're going to see the bullish breakout in the short term as well as the big picture institutional cycle that we have set up in these markets that is so clear and so perfect. And if you understand cycles and you've done your research, you will be able to see this. This is why big institutions have put so much energy and effort into cycles and into crypto, because they understand the big cycles, the little cycles. They understand. That's why it's called the Wall Street cheat sheet when we're looking at a market cycle, because this is how Wall Street looks past all of the fear and FUD and hype and everything and just sees the market for what it is. Now, let me grab some. Do your research on this stuff. Don't just assume you understand, you know? Get some good books. For example, Japanese Candlestick Charting Techniques by Steve Nyson. This book is awesome. Helps with Heikin-Ashi candlestick patterns, and this is a good book. This will help you cut through the noise in the markets. Another personal favorite of mine, Applying Elliott Wave Theory Profitability by Stephen W. Poser. This book is really good. This is a really good book. It'll help you understand how to apply Elliott Wave principle in the big picture and in smaller time frames and really understand the Fibonacci relationships. It goes through the basics, but he also talks a little bit about some of the more advanced stuff as well. Technical Analysis of the Financial Markets by John J. Murphy. Get this book as well. This will help you cut through the noise. This will help you understand what's actually happening in the markets. Because people get very, very fearful. They get opinionated. They get egotistical. They get emotional. And they forget what's actually happening in the market to see it for what it is. So you have to do your research. You have to read good books. You have to buy courses. I've spent thousands of dollars buying courses on how to do this kind of stuff, and it really helps a lot to do that. Encyclopedia of Chart Patterns, Thomas N. Bulkowski. This is a really good book. This will help you understand charting patterns and help you get all of the basics of what of all the really powerful charting patterns and what they look like. And this has a lot more than just standard double top kind of stuff in it. It's awesome. So do your research. Basically what I'm telling you guys, don't just trust opinions that you hear on the internet. Don't just trust because somebody gives a compelling case for the Fourier cycle in a YouTube video or for a double top pattern in a YouTube video. Don't just trust somebody's opinion because they give a compelling case for something. Do your own research. Study this stuff. Don't go to people that are just trying to give you fish only. Go to someone that wants to teach you how to fish and give you some fish too. Those are the best technical analysis channels that are the ones that really want you to be educated so that you're making your own educated decisions in the market. Do you think XMR will correct slightly? I kind of already talked about XMR. The correction that we just saw is the correction that I see as being the pullback. XMR is doing exactly what I've been talking about, what I've been telling people is going to happen to the crypto markets, which is going to break out of the Fourier cycle and go into a bigger institutional mass adoption cycle. And if we compare XMR to NVIDIA, you can see exactly what I mean. This is what I'm talking about. NVIDIA right here on the bottom, XMR up here on the top. It is seriously doing exactly what NVIDIA did. It's breaking out of this pattern of going like this into a bigger cycle, a bigger fractal. It's not that the market cycle doesn't exist anymore. It's that a bigger cycle took over. A bigger fractal like we were talking about with this Triforce fractal pattern. Just imagine a little triangle getting eaten by a bigger triangle. That's what happens when you deviate from a traditional 4-year cycle or 5 to 6 year cycle or 8-year cycle in stocks, and you go into a bigger cycle. A bigger market cycle is overriding a smaller market cycle. You go from one fractal to a bigger fractal, one little triangle to a bigger triangle. You guys can kind of see the parallels between the examples that I'm using. So Monero up here on the top is seriously doing exactly what NVIDIA did. It's so crazy how similar these charts look. Monero is breaking out of this traditional cyclical pattern into a bigger cycle, a bigger market cycle that's taking over this pumping and dumping structure and breaking out into price discovery. We even broke out through resistance right here, which is a really good sign. So we're in price discovery now. This pullback that we just saw, really good opportunity to buy XMR. But even if it pulled back to 500 here, buy more. But either way, this is a good area to be buying XMR. It's basically like buying NVIDIA here at $1.40 as it started to break above its old all-time high and its fractal right here and go into a full-blown bull market. Massive uptrend, blowing people away and skyrocketing. That's what XMR is doing right now. Everybody is bearish in the market. Yeah, I know everybody is because everybody married the 4-year cycle. That's what I'm telling you. These cycles, first of all, the market is going to do what a lot of people don't think it's going to do. One of the things that a lot of people think this market is going to do is the 4-year cycle. Second of all, as I've said probably 4 or 5 times on this live stream, these fractals are very real. So think of a market cycle in terms of a fractal, because that's what it is. The market cycle is a fractal. That's why you can use this image over and over again to find these cycles, because it's fractaling the same type of pattern on different time scales and different time frames over and over again. So that's what the market is. It's a fractal pattern. So it can deviate. It can break free from the smaller triangle, if you're thinking of it in terms of a fractal pattern. Just think of a triangle as a market cycle in this example that I'm using, right? It can break free out of this smaller triangle and get overwritten by a bigger triangle, a bigger institutional growth cycle, which is exactly what we saw happen with NVIDIA here on the bottom. That's exactly what's happening with XMR as we speak. That's exactly why most people don't think we're going to pump, because they're all married to this idea that the smaller market cycle is just going to keep patterning over and over again, when it's extremely common for markets to deviate and get overwritten by a bigger cycle and a bigger pattern. Matt Osti says, smash those likes. Well, thank you, Matt. Salem says, Dogecoin to the moon. Arthur, no, it's not too late to buy XMR, dude. I mean, you can miss out on it if you want to, but this thing is seriously set up to do the exact same freaking thing that NVIDIA did, as it broke above its old all-time high and seriously skyrocketed because a bigger market cycle took over. Yeah, you can disbelieve this if you want to, but that's exactly the point of the cycle that we're in for Monero. We're breaking out. This thing is not undervalued in the big picture. This thing is set up to go parabolic. It's a good entry right now to buy XMR. It's going to keep pumping and blow people away because a bigger cycle took over. So let's talk about Dogecoin. Let's pull up Doge up here on the top. I think Binance should have, there we go, cool. So Dogecoin is extremely easy to do technical analysis on. It's basically as easy as doing technical analysis on AVAX. In fact, it's a very similar pattern. So let's pull up Bitcoin on the bottom and we'll keep Dogecoin up here on the top. What Dogecoin is doing currently is a perfect repeat of what Bitcoin did on the bottom here. So we have Dogecoin up here on the top and Bitcoin down here on the bottom. So this is a pretty good study of what a market cycle looks like. Let's pull up a cycle chart here and I'll drop it on top. Okay. So here's the Wall Street cheat sheet. So let's kind of map out Dogecoin and Bitcoin on the Wall Street cheat sheet. We'll start with Bitcoin here. So this is the disbelief phase on Bitcoin right here. That coincides with this right here. Okay. Then you get your big rally all the way up. I'm not going to do every one. I know there's optimism, belief, and thrill. We're just going to focus on the major points of the cycle. Okay. Here's disbelief on Bitcoin. We rally all the way up to euphoria. That coincides with right here on the Wall Street cheat sheet. Then we pull back. This will be depression right here. That coincides with this point right here on the Wall Street cheat sheet. And then we rally up right here and we pull back. So this right here is disbelief. That's the disbelief phase on Bitcoin when Bitcoin fell from 10,000 back down to around 3,900 right before it went all the way to 69,000 per coin. So this is disbelief to start the cycle, euphoria right here, depression, and then disbelief again, right? Pretty simple. Very, very simple. Now let's look at Dogecoin up here on the top. We have disbelief right here, euphoria right here, depression right here, and disbelief again right here on Dogecoin. This is where Dogecoin is at in its cycle. So big breakout up through 48 cents and even up through 74 cents is coming for Dogecoin. It's pretty easy to see this cycle. It's the same thing that Bitcoin did here in March of 2020. So that's a pretty clear, easy to do example of a market cycle. And it's super cool. I mean, check this out. Let's take this and we'll copy this and we'll just keep that on the bottom. Then let's pull up the NASDAQ Composite Index, okay? This is the same thing that I used to predict silver. When I called the bottom on silver at $12 per ounce. When oil went negative in 2020 and people thought that oil and silver and gold were all going to die, I used this exact same thing to predict the bottom at $12 per ounce on silver. So here is the disbelief phase on the NASDAQ. Here's the euphoria phase. Here's the depression phase. And here is the disbelief phase again before moving into a new cycle. Do you see how the same thing happens in these markets? Now let's pull up, for example, let's pull up AVAX. Up here on the top. AVAX is doing the same thing. So here's disbelief on AVAX. Here's euphoria on AVAX. Here's depression. And here's disbelief again on AVAX. So the cycle repeats. It's very clear, very easy to identify. This is how you can call the bottom on markets. Silver, okay? Look at silver. Let's see if I have silver Silver trading view, high altitude investing. Yeah, here we go. Look at this, okay? When silver was worth, literally when it hit $12 per ounce, I posted on my trading view in April 9th of 2020 and said, you guys, silver is in the depression phase of the cycle. How did I know this? Because I looked at the disbelief phase here in pink, the euphoria phase marked out here in purple, the complacency marked out in green, the anger marked out in cyan, the anger marked out in green, and the depression phase marked out in purple again, comparing it to the NASDAQ and the human emotion that happened on the NASDAQ. And I said silver is in the depression phase of the cycle, and that will bottom soon. And it did bottom. That was the exact bottom on silver. I said everyone is long-term bearish, and that leaves me feeling quite contrarian. This was the absolute bottom on silver. How did I do that? Using market cycle analysis. That's how I did that. That's how I was able to look at silver and say, you know what? Silver is in the depression phase of its cycle. And if you look at silver here, here's a disbelief phase of its cycle right here. Here's euphoria right here. Here's depression right here. And here's a disbelief phase again. And then boom, breaking out all the way to a new all-time high, just like what Bitcoin did here on the bottom when it did the same exact thing. Same thing as what silver did up here. Same pattern, different time scale. This is what I mean by you're going to get cyclical patterns in markets, but it can break free because of a bigger cycle taking over. But you're going to see the same patterns. Look at silver. It's breaking free out of its cycle here where it just pumps and then dumps and pumps and dumps. It's breaking out into a bigger cycle currently. As we speak, a bigger market cycle is taking over, has more power, and it's overriding the previous cycle. How cool is that these patterns repeat? And yeah, the silver up here on the top, we're looking at from like 2002 until 2026. And with Bitcoin, this is only like 4 or 5 years worth of time on the bottom. Same cycle, different time scale. This is why market cycles are fractal in nature. The same pattern, fractal, over and over again. I was having a really hard time, but thank you for a good perspective. Yeah, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate that. The Godfather says every cycle needs a lot more money than before. That is true. But the thing is with crypto, you can see the money in the chart. Let's pull up the total crypto market cap, for example, and take a look at the total crypto market cap with the volume turned on. Look how much volume has been happening for crypto all through this period here. So my first big cycle with crypto was 2017. And if you look at the volume during 2017, there was virtually no volume in comparison to what the volume that we see today. So we have plenty of volume that's already came into this market for massive big picture growth. In fact, the crypto total market chart, cap chart looks exactly like what early day Apple computers did. When you study early day Apple being accumulated by big institutions before it went crazy, if you look right here, here's Apple on the right. Here is the total crypto market cap over here on the left. And if you look right here, big institutional accumulation in the billions right here on Apple. Big institutional accumulation in the billions for the total crypto market cap. And then look, the volume actually dropped off for Apple, but the price just kept going crazy and kept rallying. So we already have the money. It's already here for a bigger cycle. What do you think about scalping trade? I do some swing trading, not a lot of like super short-term scalping stuff. For example, I've been long on Bitcoin for probably like a month or so now. I've since the very pretty much one of the local bottoms of this recent drop. So if we look at Bitcoin, I went long like right here. I have a long position. My entry is like right here. In fact, let me check to see the exact price. Let's see here. So my entry on Bitcoin is 85,000 per coin. So pretty much right here. Well, yeah, exactly like right here is where I entered on Bitcoin and went long. So I'm up over 86% because I don't use a lot of leverage. I use low leverage on my trades. It could have been a higher percentage growth, but 86% from the bottom there on Bitcoin where I went long. So I do some swing trading, but I'm talking about holding for like multiple months and not just scalping on really short time frames. For me, it's easier to predict these bigger swings in the market than it is to predict the really short term, just crazy stuff that happens because there's a lot more volatility. So that's what works for me. But for the most profitable trading strategy ever that I've ever found in these markets is trading the big cycles. Like, this type of movement in the big picture. These big cycles are the most profitable ones to trade. And what's cool about it is we just moved into potentially what looks like is on these charts an even bigger cycle with Bitcoin. And with crypto in general. So we're set up for a lot of upside in the big picture. A lot. Which is very exciting because we're going to make a lot of money. Levent Hex wants me to do theta. Same thing with theta, you guys. It's a bigger cycle. This is a market cycle. That's what this is with theta. If we pull up theta over here on the left, and let's not use silver, let's use just the NASDAQ for an example in this case. Here's the internet bubble here on the right, and here it is theta over here on the left, okay? Look at how similar these cycles are. It's crazy how similar they are. Here is euphoria on theta. Here's our bull trap, same as this bull trap right here. So there's euphoria, bull trap, anger phase right here, anger phase right here. We curl back up a little bit, get rejected, and finally go into depression phase. So this is a perfect market cycle on theta. Not the time to be selling, not the time to be giving up, not the time to be bearish, but the time to double down, if anything else, on your position. Because if you look what happened to the NASDAQ after it hit depression from its cycle, a new bigger cycle took over. And look how much growth happened on the NASDAQ from that depression phase down here all the way up to where we're at now. Basically like 23 times, and that's stock market gains, which stock market gains are really small compared to crypto. Imagine what some of these altcoins are going to do in the big picture as they break out of their depression phase or their disbelief phase, depending on the one that you're looking at, and break out for a big picture market cycle and break above their old all-time highs. Imagine the percentage growth that a lot of those coins are going to do. AOL symbol is a fractal. AOL symbol is a fractal. AOL symbol. It kind of is a fractal. That's funny. That's cool. Oh, man. Hi, Dallin. Happy New Year. Could you please do TA on Polkadot? Sure. Let's pull up old Polkadot here and see where it's at in the cycle. Dot. And just taking a look here. This is clearly the depression phase of the cycle here for Polkadot. Here would be euphoria, right here, anger, and depression on the cycle. This is clearly the depression phase. So this is the place to be buying Polkadot. All of this, pretty much anything below this point right here, anything below like right here is a good entry for Polkadot in the big picture. So not only is it going to start to reverse down here in the short term, but because we're extremely undervalued here in the big picture, when you're zoomed out like this, looking all the way back at 2021, look how undervalued we are in comparison to our peak up here at $55. This thing is dirt cheap down here at $1.13. Perfect time to be buying Polkadot in preparation for a big reversal in the short term and for a big reversal in the big picture. This is a pretty typical cycle. This happened to be an expanded flat correction with a huge C wave here, wave A, wave B, and wave C. Big, huge wave C here for Polkadot. Perfect time to buy this coin. And if you want some examples of what some of these coins looked like, before the 2017 pump happened, Polkadot also has the same type of attitude the Litecoin had before Litecoin pumped in 2017. Same type of structure here in this market. Big, huge pullback, big, just fearful accumulation cycle, people giving up on it, it looking just totally dead, totally retraced, totally pulled back right before the reversal happens and a bigger cycle takes over and shrinks the previous cycle, and boom, we have this huge pump that happened on Litecoin. That's what I see coming for Polkadot. Thank you, bro. In God we trust. Yeah, thank you for tuning in, and I happen to agree with you. He's pretty much the only person or being that you can completely trust with all of your heart, right? I mean, there's other people you can too, but God is perfect, so you can trust him perfectly. Would you like to do a joint stream on Pulse Chain? My channel is yours. Reach out to me over X. I might be interested. Follow me on X. Let me know what your username is, and maybe we could do something. What about Dogecoin? We just barely finished talking about Dogecoin. Maybe you missed it. I'll quickly do analysis on it again for you because it goes along with what I've been talking about in today's stream, which is cycles and the importance of understanding the fact that these cycles can deviate in the sense of a bigger cycle can take over like a traditional 4-year cycle, and you can move into a bigger institutional cycle instead. So let's pull up Doge here on the left, and we'll pull up Bitcoin over here on the right, and talk a little bit about the similarities here. So here is Dogecoin on the left, and here's Bitcoin on the right. Now in terms of the market cycle, let's pull that up again. Market cycle. Steal this chart again. It's pretty easy to see. Here's the Wall Street cheat sheet. Here's disbelief. Here's disbelief on Bitcoin. Here's euphoria. Here's euphoria on Bitcoin. Here's depression. Here's depression on Bitcoin. Here's disbelief right here. Here's disbelief on the market cycle chart. And then if we look at Dogecoin, look what just happened to Dogecoin, right? Crazy. Let's do it with Dogecoin now. Disbelief phase, euphoria, disbelief, euphoria, depression, depression, disbelief, disbelief. Same thing. Same exact pattern in the markets. Even just without comparing the market cycle Wall Street cheat sheet chart, just look at Bitcoin and look at Dogecoin side by side. You know, this is how I predicted the bottom on XRP. When everybody gave up on XRP and they all thought XRP was done for, the what I used to predict the bottom on XRP right here at like pretty much 33 cents, and even this bottom as well, here at 15 cents, was market cycles. But this bottom right here, I was able to predict this whole pump on XRP, actually comparing it to Bitcoin. Because when I looked at it, I was like, this looks awfully similar to Bitcoin right here when XRP was consolidating here at like 50 cents. It's like, this looks exactly like Bitcoin. Big pump, big pullback, pump, pullback. Same thing, right? So it was in the disbelief phase of its cycle. Boom, started to break out. Now we're going for a bigger cycle, a bigger pump that we just barely started here with XRP. It's crazy how this stuff works. It's crazy cool how this stuff works. Paul Bogo says DAG will be massive. I agree with you. Litecoin, I'm super bullish on Litecoin. Litecoin is set up to do the same thing that XMR just did. I've been bullish on XMR in my VIP area, calling for a bottom on XMR. I mean, go look at this example here of just how some of this stuff works phenomenally well. Here was my call for XMR back when XMR was worth like, I think it was like worth like just over $200 in this chart right here. Calling for a big breakout all the way to a new all-time high 4 months ago for XMR. Boom, it just completely obliterated its old all-time high. It worked perfectly. Or even this fractal on Bitcoin. Look at this fractal Bitcoin, the S&P 500. I'm expecting a big breakout on Bitcoin. Same pattern, same structure. Okay. But talking about Litecoin, Litecoin's getting ready to do the same thing that XMR did. And this has to be the last coin that I cover for the day. Got other stuff to do, but Litecoin is set up to do the same thing that XMR. So let's pull up Litecoin on the left, and let's pull up NVIDIA. So NVIDIA is one of the fractals I was using to predict the big pump on XMR. One of the things I was looking at. And it's the same thing for Litecoin here. Okay? Here's NVIDIA on the right. Here's Litecoin on the left. Same thing, you guys. Big pump, pullback, big pump, pullback, sideways accumulation. Big pump, pullback, big pump, pullback, sideways accumulation. Okay? Then look, right here, NVIDIA broke out of that sideways accumulation and went parabolic, just like how XMR is doing right now. Litecoin is right behind XMR. It's right here, ready to break out, ready to go to the moon, just like what happened to XMR. Same chart. Perfect example of what I'm talking about. And I've talked about this in other streams too, but look at the volume here. Even the volume looks the same. NVIDIA here on the right, Litecoin here on the left, right? Even the volume looks the same. Like the same points have bullish increase in volume, and it's crazy how similar these charts are. But take a look at XMR one more time. This is part of the things that cued me. One of the things that cued me into this big pump coming on XMR was exactly this right here. Look at this. XMR here on the left, NVIDIA here on the right. Look at that. Isn't that crazy how the structure of these markets, the same thing? That's why I say Litecoin's like right here. Or right here if you're looking at NVIDIA. In terms of where it's at in its cycle, it's like right there. Ready to break out, ready to go to the moon. We're just getting started with XMR, you guys. This is just the start. Because we just broke out of this huge accumulation cycle here on XMR. Same accumulation cycle we broke out of with NVIDIA before breaking all the way to the moon and just completely blowing people away. XMR is just getting started, you guys. This is just the beginning of what's coming for this coin. Same with Litecoin though, right? So big things are coming. Keep your faith. It's going to be crazy. Going to be super bullish. I got to go. Got other stuff to do for the day. Hope you guys learned something, enjoyed it. Share this with your friends. People need to know this. Most people are going to get screwed believing the 4-year cycle is going to keep happening. Let people know the truth. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I love you. I appreciate you. And I look forward to seeing you guys in future videos and in future live streams. And as always, stay profitable out there.